Hello Yu-Gi-Oh players and welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJB0, and you have no idea how excited I am to see Chain Beat hitting the top 32 of a YCS, but here is Majid Khan's top 32 YCS Vegas Chain Beat deck. So I'm going to give you guys a quick analysis as to how this particular Chain Beat deck did so well at YCS Vegas. Like, you guys have no idea how excited I am to see Chain Beat showing up again. I would be focusing a lot more on Chain Beat this format now that I've seen this deck and it reminded me that it's there and that I'm excited about Chain Beat. However, Chain Beat is going to lose hard to artifacts because Breakthrough Skill and 6 MST are a thing, and those collectively kind of destroy the point of this deck. But let's get down to this deck. Let's focus on YCS Vegas. And let's get down to that deck analysis. So the monster count, you've got 9 monsters, 1 bear, triple Thunderbird, 1 Grand Mole, 1 Ryo, and triple Rabbit. This is a fairly standard Garden Beat build as far as the monster count goes. Normally people would run double bear, but you'll see in a second why that isn't such a hot idea. Grand Mole in the main deck is interesting, but you'll notice that a lot of the things that this deck is actually worried about are Xyz monsters, and so if you can put Xyz monsters back into the extra deck with Grand Mole, then you are basically a-okay to push your attacks through with things like Bear, Rabbit, and Thunderbird. The other nice thing about Grand Mole is when you have Black Garden on your board, your opponent is going to be going for things like, especially if you're playing against Hieratic Ruler, they're going to be trying to put big things like Redox on the board in defense, which you can't run over, so you want to push those back into the hand in order to run your plays through with your Thunderbird and Rabbit. So the main deck Grand Mole makes a lot of sense. Main deck Ryo is a fairly standard play for Garden Beat. If you open with like Ryo, Garden, and 3 back row, you basically win the game. So let's move on to the spell count. You've got 16 spells. You've got your triple Black Garden, 1 Dark Hole, only 2 Tenki, double Lance, double MST, triple Duality, and triple Upstart Goblin. Now, the first thing people are going to jump out at when they see this spell cat is the Upstart Goblins. So, the thing about Upstart Goblin in Chain Beat is you really don't need that many cards in Chain Beat. A lot of people have this misconception that you need to fill up Chain Beat with all the space you can, get all your bears and your tankies and stuff in there, but there are really only a select few cards in Chain Beat that are really important, and those cards are your Dodgers, your Black Gardens, and in this case it's going to be your Black Horn of Heaven, your Compulse, and your Torrential, because those are all, together they're kind of your win conditions, along with Dark Hole. So, in all reality, there aren't a huge number of cards that you actually want to have in the deck, so having as much deck thinning as possible is really good. Upstart Goblin is good for this deck. People are going to say it isn't because it gives your opponent 1,000 life points, but really honestly, in this deck, it doesn't matter. It's fairly simple to take that 1,000 life points away, and really the point of this deck isn't to deal damage, it's to gain control over your opponent so that they can't make moves, and that's when you start dealing damage. So your opponent having extra life points to go through is really not a problem for this deck. Another thing that people are going to jump on is only double Tenki. Now, there's been a lot of theory going on around Tenki and Chain Beat. I've talked about it some, how it clogs the back row. And people have talked about it before, but really, I understand why he would go for 2 Tenki. I normally run the triple Tenki double bear, but if he's running the triple Duality, which is fairly staple for Chain Beat, but also the triple Upstart Goblin, you don't need 3 Tenkis. Since you're going to get one of your rabbits or your bear in your hand fairly quickly, you don't need that 3rd Tenki, and the problem with Tenki is that it clogs up back row spaces, which is why he only runs double Fiendish Chain. So running triple Tenki could also cause you problems, so it just makes sense to only run the 2. It provides the consistency you need in order to get into those rabbits and into that bear, while not having the threat of clogging up your back row. Then you've got the double Lance. This is another thing that's fairly standard for Garden Beat. I've never been a big fan of Lance in Garden Beat, but there are cases in which it's really important. Like if you open with Bear and Garden, it's good to have Lance because you want to be able to protect your bear. The same thing with Ryo. It also shoves through attacks sometimes, when you've got a bear and you're trying to get that extra tanky onto the board so you can rabbit. So if your opponent like deprisons the bear, since the bear is really going to be the only thing your opponent is, like these three monsters are going to be the only thing your opponent can really fire off back row against. They're going to be using them against these guys. And if you can protect that bear, if you can protect that Ryo from being killed as soon as it hits the board, then you are in much better shape. Let's move on to the trap lineup, which I personally think is the most interesting thing. So you've got the triple Black Horn of Heaven, you've got one Bottomless, triple Compulse Escape, one Compulse Evac, double Deprison, double Fiendish Chain, one Mirror Force, one Warning, one Torrential. Now the really big thing in this trap lineup is the triple Black Horn of Heaven. Now if you read the feature matches for this guy, really the only cards that posed a serious threat to this deck were extra deck cards. And you'll also notice that the most common thing that people will minus on are extra deck cards. People are most likely to minus off of extra deck cards because they know that they're going to get them pluses in the long run. Which means that if your opponent is willing to stack two cards to go for minus into an extra deck card, then blowing away that extra deck card gives you a plus. Even hieratic rulers, which if you allow them to go on for long enough will get massive pluses. Once they go for that first Autumn, they're minusing because they have to use a Tefnuit and an Esset or an Ebthet or a Su or whatever the hieratic rulers are using right now. I don't really like the deck. I'm not a big OTK player. But hieratic rulers have to use up 2 monsters from their hand in order to go into Autumn most of the time, which means that they're going to go at a minus if you hit the Black Horn of Heaven button. So Black Horn of Heaven is really great for disrupting plays, especially late in the game once you gain advantage. People start trying to go for the Exciton Knight plays. This is really important. So the triple Black Horn of Heaven is really unconventional for any deck right now, especially for Chain Beat, but I think that it was a brilliant stroke of genius for Majid Khan. Then you've got triple Compulsive Escape Device. A lot of Garden Beat players these days are only playing 2, but this card is extremely important, especially against Bujin players, because it doesn't target. So if your opponent has a Yamato on the board, and a turtle in the graveyard, and a hare in the graveyard, doesn't matter because it's going back to the deck. So that is really important in this day and age. It also takes out Leo, which is a really big deal. So the Compulse Escape Device is a really great card. It also doesn't load up the graveyard for other things, so if they put an Autumn on the board, you hit the Compulse Escape Device thing, button. It doesn't add another dragon in their graveyard for a dragon ruler. You guys get the idea. The only running 2 Fiendish Chain, I explained before, only running 1 Mirror Force. With the triple Black Horn of Heaven, you really shouldn't need another Mirror Force. Mirror Force is really a late game play. When your opponent establishes a field, you can just take it out of your way, and then start going in for the kill with your Thunderbird, Rabbit, etc. So, the main deck is extremely solid. I absolutely love it, and if I was playing Chain Beat, this would be what my main deck looked like. Going into the next format, even though Chain Beat is pretty bad against artifacts, there are things you can run in this deck that can make it better. Breakthrough Skill is a good example. It's going to be mained into a lot of decks, which is a problem for this deck, but if you add extra lances, you shouldn't have as much of an issue. Since your opponent breakthrough skills, you can chain your monster. Like during their turn, you can chain your monster when they break through skill, things like that. And you can also run Malevolent Catastrophe in this deck is a really good thing. The problem is like making sure it doesn't get blind MST in the end phase by the artifact player, but there are a number of ways around that. So those are some cards you can switch up when going into the next format. Let's look at the side deck quickly. So he's got the Deep Fissure, which is fairly obligatory for Chain Beat. You've got MST, good stuff right there. Your third MST because some players run Decree, and that's a problem for this deck. You have triple Light Imprisoning Mirrors. You don't have a single light monster except Ryo in your deck. And if you've got the Light Mirror, you really don't need the Ryo. You've got 1 Macrocosmos, also fairly standard since you don't really do much with the graveyard in this deck. Triple Needle Sealing. This is a choice I absolutely love. I've been advocating Needle Sealing for this deck for a long time, but in a format where there are a lot of decks that spam the field, Needle Sealing is very, very good. Especially against hieratic rulers, where their first turn play puts enough monsters on the board in order to go off with Needle Sealing. They put an Autumn on the board, they put a Dragosack on the board, they put down 2 tokens, you get rid of the tokens and the Autumn, with the drop of a Needle Ceiling. So that's a really good card to have in here. The triple, I understand. The matchups that you run this against, you have to be very careful. And I'm sure that he didn't always side in all three of the Needle Ceiling, but it's a really good card. Overworked is fairly standard. It's you guys probably understand why I puts it in there. Fun fact, Overworked is a really good side deck card against Insectors, which are a problem deck for Garden Beat, because if your opponent equips Hornet or Ladybug to their monster, then you can Overworked and it destroys the monster, and then you are A-OK because they can't make the rest of their moves that turn. Then, of course, you've got Soul Drain. Double Vanity's Emptiness, once again for the Hieratic Ruler matchup, also good against Mermails, so that's a really good card. Then you've got the 1/7 Tools of the Bandit. Sometimes the last thing you want your opponent to do is get that extra trap card off to push their play through. One of the things that people are often willing to do against this deck, because it's so annoying to get a rabbit off the board, is they'll activate, like, you'll attack and they'll go like Mirror Force. They'll chain the rabbit and then they'll chain D-Prison. The fun thing that you can do with 7 Tools of the Bandit is if they do that, then you can hit 7 Tools of the Bandit, negate that last card, and they still go at minus, but they don't get that rabbit off the board, or that Thunderbird. So they go at minus to essentially do nothing during that turn. So 7 Tools of the Bandit is a cool card. Also helps for if your opponent activates a Decree while you have it face down, you can get rid of that Decree. Just a really interesting card for him to be running. I might have run Gorilla in the side deck. That's something I've been testing out a lot with Chainbeat, because there are some cards you really need to get rid of that you can't necessarily do if you can't get that MST in your hand, and having the tankies makes Gorilla into a searchable MST, so that's a card I might have run. Really, the extra deck is pretty self-explanatory. The extra deck doesn't matter that much in a Chainbeat deck. You hardly ever use your extra deck, so I'm not going to run down that. But that's the deck. That's Majid Khan's top 32 Chainbeat deck. So for other top 32 analyses for YCS Vegas, I wanted to do Squiddies. However, Squiddy, that's Chansey Wigglestow for those of you who don't recognize the nickname, he already did an explanation for his own deck, so I figured nobody can tell us how Squiddy's deck works better than Squiddy, so I'm not going to do an analysis for Squiddy. You guys can just check out, you can Google it. I think he actually uploaded it onto Vexicus's channel. That may not be true, though, but if you Google Chansey Wigglestow YCS Vegas, you'll see a deck profile in which he makes the explanation for his deck. So there you guys go. I hope you liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. And of course, subscribe for more decks, discussion, analysis, and general Yu-Gi-Oh! Shenanigans. I'm your host, the RJB0. Thank you guys for watching Yu-Gi-Oh! On Business Casual. I got a jet. See you guys.